Welcome, Hoosier Nation, to one of the final episodes of the season of the midweek edition of the Assembly Call. That's Josh on the other end. I'm Michael. We're here to do another Big Ten midweek roundup show. We're going to talk a little bit about the season, obviously the season that's occurred, and we're going to preview the season that has not occurred, both the Big Ten and the NCAA tournament in that order. Josh, how are you doing tonight?
Pretty good. Just riding high after that win on Saturday. Awesome senior day celebration. It was really fun to be in Assembly Hall on Sunday.
Yeah, that was different. I mean, I've been a part of a couple senior days, not a part of, but I've experienced a couple of senior days in the past, but nothing quite like IU. You know, they save it till after the game. Everyone gives their speech, whatnot. Crean talks about each guy. I liked it. It was a little lengthy, but this senior class meant so much to this team and this program that it was due. And it was very enjoyable to watch. It was a great experience, like you said. It was different from something I've experienced in the past. Overall, a great time being in Assembly Hall, especially that win. I mean, that was Maryland's worst loss of the season, and people are kind of saying, like, oh, yeah, IU beat Maryland at home. That was expected. They gave Maryland the worst loss that Maryland has seen all year. I mean, it was just a very impressive performance all around, and IU picked up – Andy tweeted the stat. I can't remember the exact number, but I believe it was 4 wins over RPI top 25 teams in 24 days, which is sensational. And I don't know how many teams this year has done that. Maybe Kansas, I'm not sure. But it can't be that many. That's a tough stat to get, so we're not going to worry about that. But we can't really preview a game, but we're going to talk about who IU could face going forward in the Big Ten. But first, we did it midway through the Big Ten season. We're going to do it at the end of the Big Ten season. Josh came up with this great idea back then. We're going to continue it because it's so good. These Big Ten report cards. Josh and I dealt out grades to everyone, even the Rutgers and Minnesotas of the Big Ten. I think you can know where those two are going. But, Josh, let's start this out right now. Mark, read us down your report card, who you have for each grade.
All right. So, first of all, in my A category, I got to go with Indiana. Obviously, 15-3, won the Big Ten, running away with 2 games difference between them and Michigan State. Really good season for the Hoosiers, obviously. Coming in second place, I guess in my grading system would be Michigan State. They really turned it on after Denzel Valentine came back, and since he came back, they've moved themselves into contention for a potential #1 seed if things go their way. And then lastly, in my A category is Wisconsin. I think what they did under Greg Gard, going 12-6 in the conference, being tied in that 4-way tie for third place is really, really good coaching from Greg Gard. He now has the job, and he's sort of running away with that right now, and Wisconsin's looking good. Should I go all the way down, or do you want to?
Yeah, let's go back and forth. So my A's are pretty much the same. Indiana, you touched on it there. In terms of the Big Ten season, Indiana had probably a 96, 97%. They were probably that Penn State game away from an A+, just because you can't go undefeated in the Big Ten nowadays. But a very solid performance from Indiana. We've talked about that a lot. That should explain itself. Michigan State, also a very solid A. They had that rough start in January to conference play, but then just got white hot from there. And then also Wisconsin. Greg Gard did a sensational job turning this team around when conference play came around after Bo Ryan resigned. Words can't express how great of a job he did. And those 3 coaches, to me, are the top 3 coaches in the Big Ten when it comes to Big Ten Coach of the Year award, but we'll get to that later. So those are my A's, the same as yours. You want me to go with B's next?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so moving down on the totem pole, my B's, I actually have Ohio State up there. I know they didn't finish well. They got obliterated by Michigan State twice in 3 games. And they didn't really have any huge wins. They did beat Kentucky, and they picked up a couple conference ones here and there, but they didn't really have anyone. In terms of talent on their roster, you look down their board, and they're comparable in the bottom 4 or 5 teams in the conference. I mean, you look at it's pretty much comparable to the guys of the Northwesterns, and they're below a Michigan. So Ohio State, for the talent they had, still picked up 19 wins, knocked off a couple big teams along the way. No one really expected them to win 19. They could have 20 wins if they win a game in the Big Ten tournament. So I'm going to have them as a reach for a B, maybe an 84, 85%. You're looking at that mid-B range. But I was impressed with Ohio State, how they performed given their lack of talent. Michigan I have right behind them, mostly because of the way they dealt with Karis LeVert's absence. He didn't play for much of the conference season. And they were all right. I think they got an 8 seed in the Big Ten tournament. They'll face Northwestern tomorrow. But they dealt with Karis LeVert's absence and just a lot of other things going on with their roster changing, and nothing was really ever sturdy for Michigan throughout the year. And they played well enough to stay out of the basement. And for me, that gets a B for them because they just had catastrophic situations. And then Purdue and Iowa were behind them just because they did what they were expected. And they both peaked kind of early, especially Iowa. Iowa peaked way too early, and they kind of Iowa'd the season, you know. They kind of plummeted and started to decline in about beginning of February, late January, more beginning of February. And they haven't really picked it back up. But that doesn't take away from what they did in the beginning of the year. So Iowa and Purdue pretty much in the same boat. They peaked early, but what they did early was very impressive. So that's enough to keep them in the solid B range for me. Josh, what do you got?
Yeah, for my Bs, I have Maryland, Purdue kind of up in that middle range of a B. I do think both those teams maybe were a little underwhelming this year, could have maybe won a few more games in the conference, had a couple bad losses, but I still put them up there because they're two solid teams. I think they're capable of doing a lot more. They have a really high ceiling going forward, and I think it's just a matter of putting it all together and peaking. I still think they have some time to peak. If they win a couple games in the Big Ten tournament, they can have themselves in a really good spot come next week in the Big Ten tournament. But obviously Maryland not been playing too well as of late. And in my last B spot, I got Michigan. I think without Karis LeVert, this team has done a pretty good job this season getting themselves in a place where they're right on the bubble and they kind of control their own destiny. If they win, they're probably going to be in. If they lose, got to leave it up to the selection committee for that one. But I do like what Michigan did without Karis LeVert. I think that's a big loss that Michigan had to endure, and I think they came out the other end pretty solid.
Absolutely, and it's funny you should mention Maryland or put Maryland in your B because I actually have them in my C. And I'll tell you why. Because going into the season, you know, with Rashid Suleiman joining them, everyone was like, "Oh, the Big Ten, it's over. It's over." You know, I don't care if Michigan State's got Denzel as their star and Izzo as their head coach. I don't care if Indiana's returning everyone. It's over. Maryland's got it. They've got Diamond Stone, who they were missing. Melo Trimble's going to go off this year. And to be honest with you, Maryland was beyond disappointing to me because with the talent they had going into the Big Ten season, I'm like, these guys could run the table. I mean, they are just absolutely loaded. But I don't think Rashid Suleiman and Melo Trimble ever really clicked. I feel like they never shared a mutual great game. And when Trimble went off, Suleiman was quiet. And when Trimble was ice cold, it was Suleiman's game. So they didn't really have these checks and balances that great teams have. And they both kind of played to be that leader despite Melo Trimble being the clear leader of that team. Rashid Suleiman would hit the floor with the mindset that he's that team's leader and he's the best guy on the floor. And you can't do that with guys like Carter and Stone and Lehman and Trimble and all those other guys. And to cap it all off, upon their Big Ten collapse, I guess, they lost 4 of their final 6. And they were number 3 in the preseason poll with 14 first-place votes. I'm going to be honest with you, I was not a fan of Maryland last year or the year before that. This year, I was sold. And they had the pieces, and Mark Turgeon didn't do a great job handling them, and they never played well. They didn't blend well, and they crumbled down the stretch, lost 4 of their last 6, embarrassed by IU in Assembly Hall. So they get a C for me, and right along them is Northwestern, just because, again, we can keep saying that Chris Collins is on the brink to break through with this program, and they're trending upward, but we can only say that for so long. And this is the season where we should have started to see results, and they never had a big win. They were very, very middle of the conference. They got 9th. If you take away the top 3 teams that stand out every year, they got 9th in the conference. They never had a big win. They weren't that great or impressive. So Northwestern's got to do something starting next year, really, and make some noise in the Big Ten if they want to really actually be truthfully trending in the right direction. Josh, what do you got for C?
For C's, I got Ohio State kind of right at that C-plus range. I think you made very good points as having them in your B range because I think they probably played a little bit better than people thought, although this still is Ohio State, and they still did have a couple good wins, and they probably could have put some things together early on. I do think that loss early on at Indiana was a big speed bump for them because they seemed like they were getting things back after losing 4 straight games in the non-conference, and they go to Indiana. Big speed bump right there, and then they kind of got it back going towards the end of the regular season, but still I find them in my C range. Right below them, I have Iowa. They peaked in the middle of the Big Ten season, and I expected them to keep moving. I mean, they had Jared Utoff, they had Peter Jacques, and they had Mike Gazelle, who were all playing great basketball. And all of a sudden, you just don't know what happened to them, and they're falling by the wayside and hoping to hold on to a 5 seed, maybe even a 6 seed at this point. But they've really fallen off. They have not been too fantastic, in my opinion. And at the bottom of my seed range is Northwestern. I do think winning, I think they have 19 wins. Correct me if I'm wrong. 19 wins is pretty solid for a Northwestern program that that is kind of on the rebuild. Oh, 20 wins. Sorry about that. That's on the rebuilding track. It was the first time ever getting 20 wins in the regular season. So, I mean, they're moving in the right direction, and I like what Chris Collins is doing there. It's just once they got to the Big Ten, they totally faltered. And, I mean, can't really fault them for that because they play in a really tough conference.
Yeah, and nothing to take away from Northwestern. It's a lot of credit to the Big Ten, but also they're just not quite there yet. These D's and F's we should run through fairly quickly. Not much to care about there. Tell me if you disagree with me anywhere. My D's, I have Nebraska, Illinois, and Penn State.
Yeah,
okay, Josh agrees with me.
I got the same. Yeah.
Yeah, Penn State maybe closer to that D+. They almost broke through in the C range with a low C- because they had a couple great wins, but they still were around 500, which is about where they were last year. I think their record actually declined. They had a tougher non-conference schedule this year, but their record was a little worse. They did pick up some good wins, but they had some bad losses, and they couldn't really come through. So D+ for Penn State, and then the F's are the obvious Minnesota and Rutgers.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. Rutgers and Minnesota are our two favorite teams.
However, absolutely, and what a game that was on Saturday. But I want to give an honorary A out to Coach Eddie Jordan of Rutgers for both making it through the regular season without getting fired, and B, winning his final regular season game. I mean, if that's not a mic drop, I don't know what it is. He made it through the whole way, got just embarrassed in every aspect of the word, and then won his final game in blowout fashion. I don't know what he was saving it up for, if he wanted to have a great final curtain call, whatever, but honorary A out to Eddie Jordan, just for very weird reasons that we won't really get into. But we're going to keep going down the list. We've got 3 awards to give out. They were all announced, but Josh and I are going to pitch in our 2 cents, whether or not we agree or disagree. Coach of the Year, as you all should know, if you don't, it was Tom Crean. And Terry Morin won it for the women's, too. So Indiana picked up both the men's and the women's Big Ten Coaches of the Year. Sensational job. They went undefeated at home, all that good stuff. Josh, Tom Crean, Big Ten Coach of the Year. Agree or disagree?
Completely agree. Where this team was after Duke and after Maui and where this team is now it's basically 2 different teams if you really look at it. I mean, things did not look good after that Duke trip, and it was just in total shambles. They come back, get back on track against 3 pretty bad opponents, and then turn it on against Notre Dame. And I think in the pre-Big Ten tournament press conference today, Crean said it was halftime of that Notre Dame game that really turned the season around, and going 20-3 for the rest of the season. Very impressive, well-deserved, because he turned this team from probably a non-tournament team to a potential 3 seed in the NCAA tournament and a Big Ten champion. That's a fantastic job. He got this team to buy in, play defense, limit the turnovers. I mean, he's done a fantastic job all season long. And no disrespect to Greg Gard, who I think is in second place. It's probably a pretty close second too. But I think Tom Crean just kind of takes it over Gard. Yeah,
and on senior night the other night, we were both there. Crean had probably my favorite quote from him probably ever is actually Zeisloft brought it up, but it is a Crean line. And Zeisloft said in Maui after they got 6th place and lost that final game, I believe it was to UNLV, he said that they were all in the locker room, their heads were down, no one was really saying anything. It was dead quiet. Crean walks in, looks around, quiet, no one's really saying anything. He's just kind of pacing back and forth like he typically does, and says, "How many of you guys play for Indiana? I don't think it's any of you. You all play at Indiana, but you don't play for Indiana." And that's something that everyone in Bloomington really has gotten around and gotten behind and supported. I see hashtag for Indiana all over the place within 12 hours of Zeisloft saying that. That should be this team's mantra going forward. Play for Indiana. It's great to win at home. It's great to go 17-0. That's fantastic. But guess what? The tournament is not played at home. You play at Indiana to put a sixth banner on that wall. And you're not going to win that sixth banner if you only play at home, if you only play at Indiana. Play for Indiana. So that was absolutely fantastic. I thought that's a great line from Crean. And I'm getting off on a tangent a little bit, but that's something that this team's got to play with going forward. But for my coach of the year, I'm going to do a little hot take. Everyone's saying it's either Crean or Greg Gard. Obviously, Tom Crean is the best in my opinion, or he did the best job this year in my opinion. He's not necessarily the best coach, but he did the best job this year. But I think the best coach this year in the Big Ten was Tom Izzo. How can you disagree with that? They're number 2 in the country. The number 1 team in the country they beat earlier this year. Yeah, they had a cold stretch in January in conference and lost 4 straight. And then they won a couple, I think 5 in a row, then lost to Nebraska, and then won 4 in a row, and then lost to Purdue, and then won their next 5 or something like that. And they've just been obliterating these teams as they go through. And Denzel Valentine, spoiler alert, is my player of the year. It is just sensational. Words can't describe what he's been doing for this team. He's no doubt the leader of this team and the Big Ten, and him and Izzo combined, it's just a monster that no one really wants to face come tournament time. And I already said it. So, like I said, Denzel is my player of the year. He's averaging over 19 a game, 7.5 rebounds, 7.5 assists. He had a triple-double against Kansas. He torched Indiana, 14 boards against Maryland. He can do it all, and again, his team's second in the country. So I got Denzel for my player of the year. Josh, I know you disagree with me. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of being a homer here, but I got to go with Yogi Ferrell. I mean, he was here for the entire season. Denzel Valentine was not, and that's my one knock on him. He was fantastic. There's no doubt about that. He came back, and Michigan State ran the table. But without Yogi Ferrell on this team, I don't think Indiana is even sniffing the top of the Big Ten. I don't think they're even close. Yogi Ferrell's play this year was some of the most impressive play in the entire country, and I don't think he got enough credit for what he did. And Yogi Ferrell has just been he's been a good leader. He's been scoring. He's been assisting. He's been rebounding. I mean, he's been doing it all. Maybe not on the same level as Denzel Valentine, but I just think because Yogi Ferrell was here the entire season, and he led Indiana to a Big Ten championship, I think that pushes him above Denzel Valentine. And actually, Dan Dockich came up with a really interesting point during the Indiana-Iowa game. He said, Denzel Valentine is my player of the year nationally, and then Yogi Ferrell was his Big Ten player of the year. And I agree with that completely because Yogi Ferrell in the Big Ten has been fantastic. Denzel Valentine wasn't here for the entire Big Ten season, so I think you're kind of taking something away from Yogi Ferrell when somebody isn't playing 4 games that Denzel Valentine did not play. So I'm going to go with Yogi Ferrell for my Big Ten Player of the Year. I definitely understand that Denzel Valentine won it because he's a fantastic basketball player. Wouldn't be surprised if he wins the National Player of the Year. But for me, I'm going to go with Yogi Ferrell. And then for my Freshman of the Year, I'm going to go with Ethan Happ. He was very good, kind of burst onto the scene a little bit as a big man. You saw Thomas Bryant and Diamond Stone. Those were kind of the 2 guys coming into the season that were like these big freshman recruits coming in, playing for 2 of the top teams in the Big Ten. But Ethan Happ slowly but surely just kind of climbed his way to the top of the Big Ten as a freshman, and I think he was really impressive this year. Stone was obviously very good. Bryant was obviously very good. But in that overtime win against Indiana, Ethan Happ played a fantastic game, and he continued that for the rest of the season. I think he won the Big Ten Freshman of the Year at least twice this season. He was very impressive, and I think he outperformed Diamond Stone and Thomas Bryant, and he was kind of underrated as well, and that's why I'm going to go with Ethan Happ.
I 100% agree with you, and as much as I'd like to say Thomas Bryant, I just can't. And before I give my brief analysis, well, Thomas Bryant, Diamond Stone, and Ethan Happ, none of them played like freshmen. These 3 just blew me, and I'm sure every other Big Ten basketball fan, away with how quickly they could impact their respective teams. So, first of all, a sensational job to all of them. They certainly did not disappoint. They were all the hype. But it's got to be Ethan Happ. The numbers he was putting up for his Wisconsin team were not freshman-like, despite him being a freshman. And After what they went through in the non-conference slate, Bo Ryan stepping down, retiring, and losing to Western Illinois in their home opener. This team had lit the whole world against them. There's like, oh, there's no way that this team could succeed. And yeah, they're a 6th seed in the Big Ten tournament. But I think they got 20 wins. And let me double check. I think, yeah, they had 20 wins, and they had a disastrous non-conference slate. Disastrous. And they didn't have anything going for them going into conference play when Bo Ryan stepped down and gave the spot to Ray Guard. No one knew what to expect. So it was Nigel Hayes and against the world pretty much for Wisconsin after Bo Ryan was done and nothing was going their way. And Ethan Happ steps up and just becomes that team's almost second player with Bronson Koenig kind of struggling. So Ethan Happ, no doubt, is the Big Ten Freshman of the Year. Josh and I both agree on that. You could think however you want, whether you want to do Thomas Bryant, Diamond Stone if you're a fan of the big men, but it's Ethan Happ, whether you like it or not. I'm sorry. He was just the most impactful and meant the most to his team. Now we're going to transition a little bit from the individual awards, and we're going to look at the Big Ten tournament. We've got 4 questions mapped out here that we're going to talk about. And the first of that is, who does Indiana want to face round by round if they keep winning? So that first matchup, the 9 versus 8, I'm looking at it down here. That's why I keep looking down, is Michigan and Northwestern. Obviously, they want to play Northwestern. They match up so much better against Northwestern. The Wildcats are far less athletic. They don't have a lot of playmakers. Bryant McIntosh couldn't do anything earlier this year, and all they have is Trey Demps, really. And he can only do so much, especially if Robert Johnson's healthy and guarding him. Maybe even Yogi, too. Like I said, that they'd make that switch last game, and they did. So it's pretty obvious to me Indiana would rather play Northwestern over Michigan in that Friday game. Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with you completely on that. But at the same time, I think if they do end up playing Michigan, which I think will end up happening, I think they'll have no problem playing Michigan. They did kill them. I mean, they pretty much wiped the floor with Michigan on their home floor back at the beginning of February, and that was probably one of Indiana's best performances of the entire season. So, I mean, now down the stretch, Indiana might be playing even better than they were back at the beginning of February. And so, I mean, Northwestern is probably who you want to face just because they're probably a bit of a lesser opponent, but at the same time, I don't think Michigan is really that much better than a team like Northwestern.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily splitting hairs. There's a little bit of a gap there, but the gap between Indiana and either of those teams is unworldly. So they should come out with a win there if they play their game. Now, if they do win that, they will likely play the winner of Purdue and Iowa. And to be completely honest with you, despite this being the 3rd time and it's so hard to beat a good conference team 3 times, I think it's better for Indiana to play Iowa. They've pretty much outplayed them in every phase of the game each time, and Iowa's had these mini runs to get back into the game, but Indiana then just pulls away. And if you play Purdue again, Purdue kept it very close in Assembly Hall in the middle of their kind of downfall and Indiana getting hot. So especially with the three big men, I don't want Indiana to face them again. I think that's going to pose a lot of trouble. I think they played it perfectly last time, but then again, the ball's in Purdue's court, and they can win that chess match if they really, really want to, because they now have game film on how they failed against it. They can build off that and succeed. They have a couple great wins to round out the year. If I'm Indiana, despite it being a rivalry game and you want to beat Purdue again, you're not necessarily going to beat Purdue. In fact, that's a tougher matchup. I would much rather see the Hoosiers play Iowa in that Saturday slate if that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you on that as well, because Iowa they've just been going in a total downfall, and they really have not been able to turn around all that well. I mean, they went out and beat Michigan on the final day of the season, but I just think Indiana played Iowa very well both times they played them this year, although beating them 3 times, that's really, really tough. Pittsburgh did that against Syracuse today, beat them by 1. So, I mean, it's definitely possible. It can happen. But at the same time, you're playing Purdue, and that's a rivalry game. It's in Indianapolis. It's 2 in-state rivals. I just think that's a dangerous game for Indiana, especially with Purdue wanting some revenge. I mean, Iowa wants revenge as well, but I think Purdue is a little bit more nasty in their wanting for some revenge than Iowa, just because that in-state rivalry. So I think I would go with at the same time, if you do face Purdue, I do think you have a very good chance of beating them, but at the same time, that it's that rivalry factor. You just got to throw all the records out the window, and that's always a tough physical game. Then you got to come back the next day and potentially play in the championship if you get through that. So a lot going on in kind of that 1 versus 4 or 5 matchup that you'll probably get.
Yeah, and either team's going to want blood from Indiana. There's no doubt about that. No one can deny that. Iowa wants to beat Indiana. You know, they beat them twice, and they won the Big Ten title on Iowa's home floor. So both teams want to beat Indiana. Now it's just about the matchup, and it's got to be Iowa. If they win that, they will be in the Big Ten championship against – it's pretty much a toss-up when you get to the bottom half of that bracket. Obviously, the favorite, in my opinion, would be Michigan State. They sit at the 2 seed. The 3 seed is Maryland. And then you got Wisconsin playing Maryland. Likely, Wisconsin will play Maryland unless they lose to Nebraska/Rutgers, whoever wins that game. So I'm going to say, and just in terms of seeding and favorites and lines, Michigan State plays Maryland in the semi. Michigan State wins. This is actually a great transition into our next question, which is how far can they go and who's the favorite? I kind of blended those two together because they go well. So how far can Indiana go? Which, you know, the obvious answer is they can win it all because they won the Big Ten in the regular season. But are they necessarily the favorite? And I'll start this one off just because, you know, I'm rambling right now. I might as well continue. That Indiana can obviously win it all, no doubt about it. They've beaten almost every team except for Michigan State. Every team that's relevant in terms of the Big Ten tournament except for Michigan State. Can they beat Michigan State? Yes. If they were to square off in the championship and I had to place my money on one team, who would I put it on? I would say Michigan State, to be honest with you. I don't know why. I think it's just that Izzo and Valentine factor. Valentine being a senior, Izzo being, you know, Izzo. And just the way Michigan State's been playing. And despite Indiana being that 1 seed, Michigan State, I think, would have the nod in that game in Vegas just because Indiana hasn't quite proven themselves on the road. They played Michigan State at Michigan State and got embarrassed. And that was just a month ago. That'll be one day from a month removed from that obliteration in the championship if those teams both were to make it there. But in all honesty, I do see those teams making it there, Indiana and Michigan State. I'd be pretty surprised if it were otherwise. If I had to put my money on another team, I'd probably say Purdue. But right now I see Indiana and Michigan State and probably Michigan State taking the crown. Joshua, how do you see this tournament playing out?
Yeah, I would probably see Michigan State making it to the championship, whoever they played. I think they're the favorite. They are playing the best basketball in the Big Ten, and I say that without hesitation because once Denzel Valentine came back, this team took off on another level. And it's not just Denzel Valentine. He's obviously the leader and the catalyst of that entire team. But then you got somebody like Bryn Forbes, who's coming off a Big Ten Player of the Week honor just last week. He's playing at a high level. And then Michigan State's peaking right now. They want to get to that number 1 seed. And winning the Big Ten championship might end up doing that for them. And they're going to be hungry for that because they want to avenge those 4 losses early on and say, oh, those were just because Denzel Valentine was out, and that's probably the case. But still, they're going to want to win this Big Ten championship. And for Indiana, being the number 1 seed, I think that's really tough. Being the number 1 seed, coming into a tournament like this, where you got to play 3 games in 3 days if you're going to win the championship. Win the championship. That's tough because everybody's going to come and give you their best shot, especially like a team like Purdue if you play them in the next round, or a team like even Iowa who you've beaten twice, and then you get a team like Maryland at the bottom. I don't think they're even going to get past Michigan State. So I do see it, Michigan State being in the final. Then it's tough because that 1 versus 4 or 5 matchup is going to be such a toss-up. I just don't know how to pick that quite yet. It'll be interesting to see if Robert Johnson comes back or if he injures himself, or just what happens if there's any injuries, how they played, if it's a blowout. It's just there's so many factors that play into these quick turnaround games that it's pretty hard to predict. But I do think Michigan State is the favorite going in just because they're playing some great basketball right now, and they want that number 1 seed.
Absolutely. And you say it's tough to predict, and you're not wrong. You're 100% correct. In fact, it is tough to predict straight up what's going to happen here in the championship. But let's make this easier for our listeners and for ourselves and for people that care about the Big Ten. And let's break this down matchup by matchup. So what would happen to Indiana in terms of their seeding in the NCAA tournament, Josh, for each scenario? So let's break this down by scenario. What would happen in the completely unlikely event that they lose in the first round. Our Andy Bottoms, our bracketologist, has them at a 3 seed right now. For reference, the other 3 seeds, the 3 seeds as a whole are Indiana, Utah, Miami, Florida, the U, and West Virginia. Those are the 3 seeds. And if they lose, obviously that hurts their resume to Michigan/Northwestern. The 4 seeds are Kentucky, Purdue, Duke, Texas A&M. So, just a little food for thought there. Take that however you want. What would happen to IU in terms of their seeding, you think, if they lose that first game?
I would see them dropping to a 4 seed at most, because you can't just look into one game and say, oh, they had a bad loss right at the end of the season. I think you got to look at the whole body of work, and they went out, won the Big Ten. I mean, that's pretty impressive right there. It's one of the best conferences in the country. And so, I mean, losing one game is probably pretty bad. You don't want to do that, especially against a team like Michigan or Northwestern, which would probably move Michigan into the field if they did beat Indiana for sure. But probably no more than a 4 seed, I would say, because beating Maryland by 18, that's a very, very impressive win. You were saying those 4 wins against RPI top 25 teams in the last 24 days. That is pretty impressive. That shows that you're playing pretty good basketball. So I don't think you're going to drop very far, maybe to the 4 line. But right now, Indiana 3 seed sounds about right. If they win and maybe win 2 games, they're definitely in a 3 spot. But right now, if they lose 1 game, I'd say a 3, or say a 4.
I'm with you there. I think they don't drop below a 4, and I'm going to play a little situational here. So everyone, follow my words closely, and Josh, you too, because I'm going to ask you if you agree or disagree with this. I'm just going to try and speed right through this. So with a loss, I think they drop to a 3. If they win their first, lose their – I'm sorry, drop to a 4. Drop to a 4, my fault. If they win their first, lose their second, I think they still stay at a 3. If they win their first, win their second, losing the championship, they stay at a 3. And if they win it all, I think it really depends on what else happens throughout the country and those 2 seeds, which right now Andy has Michigan State, Xavier, Oregon, North Carolina. And for what it's worth, he's got Virginia at that 1 seed. So whoever that ACC champ is, whether it's North Carolina or Virginia, assuming it's one of those 2, no one else really is playing that well, the winner will probably get the 1. The loser will probably get the 2. I don't want to put words in Andy's mouth. That's just what I think. You can read his whole post. He's got a new post up today with his updated bracketology. You look at Oregon. I think if they lose early in their tournament, which probably won't happen, they could flip-flop with IU if IU wins. Xavier's probably in the same boat just because they don't really have too many great wins. They've got a fantastic win, but they don't have their large body of work is not consistent. They don't have a lot of huge wins. And then you look at Michigan State, they're probably sealed in at a 2 at the least. So I think for Indiana to get that 2 seed, they no doubt have to win the conference tournament, the Big Ten tournament. And they also need Oregon, probably Xavier, to lose in their tournament at some point before the championship. It's a lot of stuff. A lot of dominoes need to fall. I don't think it will happen. It could, but I don't think it will. But to me, that's the only thing it will take for Indiana to jump up and grab that 2 seed. Josh, that was a lot of words. What do you think?
I completely agree with what you just laid out, and I key on Oregon because I think that's a team that maybe has been a little overrated in my sense, because they did win a very good Pac-12. There's a lot of parity in that conference this season, and that's a team I could see moving down to the 3 line. And if Indiana wants to move up, Indiana fans should be rooting for Washington tomorrow to beat Oregon, because that would be a big key in that moving up. And then there's teams like in the Big East, like Seton Hall. I don't know where they're seated, but Seton Hall and Providence will be big players also going up against Villanova and Xavier, because if one of those teams loses, they're going to move down, and there's a chance for Indiana to move up there. But Indiana has to take care of business first, because they need to play they need to make the championship probably if they want to get to that 2 line, and probably win it if they want to get to that 2 line, because they seem pretty locked into a 3 right now, just looking at all the other teams there and looking at who's behind them. So maybe a loss would move them back to a 4, but I think if they win a game, maybe win 2 games, they're definitely locked into a 3. But then going forward to a 2, that's pretty interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the other turns, because there's so many ACC teams up there. It depends what happens in the Big 12. It's kind of like putting a puzzle together. You just got to see what is left on the table at the end.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, if you had to put your money on it, I would think IU stays at the 3. And if they do lose in that semifinal game, then it really depends on what else happens to an extent. I don't think it relies on that. But Andy's other 4 seeds are Kentucky and Texas A&M. Those are 2 of them. Another one, I believe, was Purdue. Yeah, another one was Purdue, a team that Indiana beat. Now, if Purdue beats Indiana in the semifinal, then it's a coin flip. It depends on how Purdue does. It depends on how other things do. But the reason I threw out Kentucky and Texas A&M, because they're both in the same conference, and they both can't win their conference tournament. So if one of those teams, and they're both very vulnerable, if one of those teams can go down early in their conference tournament, by early I mean semifinal or below, not make it to the championship, if they don't face each other, that would almost secure Indiana's spot at a 3, despite what happens in their semifinal game. Let's assume Duke doesn't make a run, because they looked awful today. They haven't looked good in a couple weeks. Duke is that other 4 seed. That's why I bring them up. There are a lot of pieces that need to fall together for Indiana to get that 4. It's more likely for that to happen than for Indiana to run the table in the Big Ten tournament and have all those dominoes fall and get the 2. So, take that however you want. But I think the most likely scenario is for us to see Indiana at a 3. If they are going to get a 2, they'd probably overtake Oregon, just because Oregon doesn't have that great win that Xavier does. But right now, Josh, it's a 3 for me. And then probably a 4, then probably a 2. 2's almost out of the question. 4's unlikely, but still possible. But I think a 3 is a very sure bet.
Yeah, no, a 3 seems basically where they're going to be, and unless they do end up losing Friday against Northwestern or Michigan, which is probably highly unlikely, but at the same time it's March, and Michigan needs a marquee win, and if they're playing Indiana, that's their chance at a marquee win, that's their chance to secure a spot in the field. So you just got to be careful in the game on Friday, and then you got to hope teams lose and just things kind of work out your way. You don't necessarily need to make it to the championship game to get that 3 seed, like we were saying, but things also kind of have to go your way and make sure you kind of stay where you are, because once you lose, you're done and your profile is done. So that's kind of what you have, and you got to hope other teams aren't moving up or winning a championship like Kentucky or Texas A&M. Both of those teams could easily move up to a 3 line, and if Indiana loses early, that could move them back. So you just got to be careful about other teams in other conferences winning tournaments, because I think when there's this many teams up there and they're all very good teams, especially this year with so much parity, you just got to be careful about who's moving up, and teams are so close that probably winning a championship a tournament championship is the only way really to really move up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we'll see if Indiana can get that tournament championship. But for all IU fans out there, for this matchup, their first-round matchup, and trust me, I'm one step ahead of you, root for Northwestern over Michigan. The Wildcats don't pose that great of a matchup. Josh liked that one. The Wildcats don't pose that tough of a matchup for Indiana. Michigan kind of does. You take away that huge 28-0 run in Ann Arbor, and that's a game. I know that's taking about 4 minutes rather of an entire basketball game, but you take out that ridiculous run that won't ever happen again that Indiana had, and that's a game, because that was a 13-point final, despite it being ugly pretty much the whole second half. But root for Northwestern if you're an IU fan, which I'm assuming you all are, in that first game tomorrow, I believe at noon Eastern on BTN. And then we'll see where it goes from there. If Indiana were to win on Friday, you're going to want to root for probably Iowa over Purdue, unless you can see the future and for a fact Indiana will beat whoever they play next. Then root for Purdue just so we can get some extra bragging rights, beat them twice in 1 year, and they'd have the big donut on the Hoosiers. That's all I got for tonight. Can't speak towards the end of the show anymore, Josh. That's about all I got for tonight, Josh. You have any closing thoughts?
Not too much. I actually have one stat. I was looking on Twitter today. Indiana is 10-17 in the Big Ten tournament. overall. So that's going to be interesting to see if they can kind of reverse the script a little bit, get back to the championship game where they haven't been in quite some time. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I also want to give a shout out to my sister. It's her 17th birthday today. So happy birthday, Emily. And hopefully the Hoosiers can help you celebrate when I get home on Friday.
Absolutely got to get that shout out there. I just had something to say, and I completely forgot it. Oh, here it is again. That's about all we got for tonight. But next week, this is my thing, so here it is. Next week, we are working on a very special guest that you will not want to miss. Not confirmed yet, but we are looking forward to it. We hope it goes through. And if it does, we will be talking brackets, and probably a little bit of brackets if we have the time. So we'll announce that if that goes through and if it's official. And if so, we're very excited to have this guy. And he's going to help us. He's going to help you. And we're going to talk a lot of brackets. Just 24, really only probably about 14 to 15 hours before the tournament kicks off Thursday morning. So we'll probably get back to you Wednesday night with or without this guest. And we're going to talk brackets no matter what. So stay tuned for that. We'll announce that on Twitter in the coming days whenever we can get that finalized. So keep an eye out for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. And go IU. Watch this tournament. It'll mean a lot going forward, and root for Northwestern in that first round game. Please, they need it. But that's all I got for tonight. Josh, this was fun, and I'll see you next week, and we are going to talk brackets.